Everyone laughed when she bought a ruined house, but when they walked inside, they turned pale. Sarah had always been a dreamer, the kind of person who saw possibilities where others only saw problems. When most people walked past an old, rundown house, they would cringe or shake their heads, but not Sarah. She saw beyond the peeling paint and the crumbling walls. In her eyes, the house was not just a broken building, but a canvas waiting to be brought back to life. It was her dream to restore it to its former glory. But when Sarah told her friends and family about her decision to buy the house, they laughed. It wasn't just a light chuckle. They really didn't think she could pull it off. "Are you sure you want to do this?" her cousin Mark asked, eyebrows raised in disbelief. "It's been abandoned for years. That place is falling apart. You're just wasting your money." Sarah didn't let their doubts shake her. She had always been someone who made her own decisions, no matter how risky they might seem. The house was located at the edge of town, a beautiful Victorian-style building with intricate details that only a few could appreciate. The windows were shattered, the garden was overgrown with weeds, and the roof had collapsed in several places. The building had clearly been neglected for decades. It looked hopeless, like a relic from a time long past. But to Sarah, this was the perfect challenge. She had always loved restoring things. Whether it was old furniture she found at garage sales or broken-down pieces of equipment, Sarah had a knack for fixing things that others had given up on. And this house, in her mind, was no different. It wasn't ruined, it was just misunderstood. Her friends didn't see it that way. They thought she was being reckless, choosing a hopeless cause instead of using her money on something more practical. "You could buy a new house for what you're about to spend fixing this one," said her best friend, Emily. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone." But Sarah didn't want a new house. She wanted a home with character, with history. She was tired of seeing everything in the world be so modern, so generic. She wanted something that would tell a story, something that had a past and could have a future. Despite the teasing and the constant questioning, Sarah remained firm. She went ahead and bought the house. People continued to doubt her decision, whispering behind her back, but she didn't mind. She had always believed that the best things in life came from taking risks. She wasn't about to let fear of failure stop her from following her dream. The first few days after she took ownership of the house were overwhelming. The house was even worse than she had imagined. The air inside smelled musty, like old wood and dust, and the floorboards creaked under her weight. She had to step carefully as she explored each room, worried that the floors might collapse at any moment. But despite the chaos around her, she could already picture the house in its transformed state. She could see the elegant staircase polished to perfection, the grand chandelier shining above, and the old fireplace roaring with warmth on a cold evening. Sarah spent the next few weeks researching everything she could about restoring old houses. She visited other old homes, looked at books on architecture, and talked to anyone who had experience with renovation. She learned about insulation, plumbing, wiring, and the importance of foundation repair. It was hard work, but she felt alive with excitement. Every time she learned something new, she felt one step closer to realizing her vision. Of course, things didn't always go as planned. The house had more problems than she expected. The plumbing was completely broken, and the electrical wiring was so old it looked like it might catch fire at any moment. The roof needed to be completely replaced, and the walls were full of cracks and holes. The structure of the house was much weaker than she had anticipated, and the contractors she hired were concerned about the safety of working in such a fragile building. But Sarah didn't give up. She knew that it wouldn't be easy, but she had the determination to make it work. She found skilled workers who were willing to take on the challenge with her. Some days they worked long hours, tearing down old walls, replacing damaged beams, and patching up leaks. Other days were spent removing old furniture and cleaning out the debris that had accumulated over the years. But little by little, the house began to transform. One of the first areas Sarah tackled was the living room. The walls had been covered in layers of wallpaper that had long since peeled away, revealing the bare, cracked plaster underneath. Sarah spent hours scraping the walls clean, carefully removing the old paper and smoothing the surface. When the walls were ready, she had them painted in a soft, warm cream color that brightened the room. The floor, which had once been covered in a thick layer of dust, was cleaned and polished, revealing beautiful wooden floors that had been hidden for years. Despite the progress she was making, Sarah still felt the weight of doubt hanging over her. When she showed her friends and family the progress she had made, they still didn't believe it could be done. "It's looking better," Emily admitted reluctantly, "but there's still so much left to do. Are you sure this is worth it?" Sarah simply smiled. "I'm not doing it for anyone else, I'm doing it for me. This house has potential and I'm going to bring it back to life." As she continued to work, Sarah started to notice something strange. There were odd noises coming from the house at night, soft creaks and whispers that seemed to echo through the empty halls. At first, she dismissed it as the house settling, but the sounds grew more frequent. One evening, as she was walking through the house, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, but no one was there. A chill ran down her spine, and she couldn't help but wonder if the house had a history that was yet to be uncovered. The more Sarah explored, the more she found hidden away in the house. In the attic, she discovered old furniture, dusty books, and piles of forgotten belongings that had been left behind by the previous owners. One day, while sifting through an old chest, Sarah found something unexpected, a leather-bound journal. The journal was covered in dust, but it looked remarkably well preserved. She opened it carefully, her heart racing with curiosity. The entries inside were written in elegant script, detailing the lives of the house's original owners, a family who had lived there many years ago. The more Sarah read, the more fascinated she became. The journal spoke of the family's joys and struggles, of their hopes for the future and their heartbreaks. There were mentions of celebrations and tragedies, of love and loss. It felt as though the house was telling her its story, sharing its secrets with her, as if it had been waiting all this time for someone to listen. The more Sarah read, the more she realized that this house was not just a project to her. It was a part of something much larger, a piece of history that she had been entrusted with. And as she learned more about the family who once lived there, she began to see the house not just as a building to be fixed, but as a home that deserved to be remembered. Despite the challenges, Sarah pushed forward. The house was becoming more than just a place to live. It was becoming a part of her, a symbol of her determination and her dreams. And with each passing day, as the walls were patched up, the floors were polished, and the rooms began to shine with light once again, Sarah could feel the house coming alive. It wasn't just a project anymore, it was her home, and it was ready to be filled with new memories. As the days went on, Sarah's house slowly began to show signs of life. It wasn't just about fixing the broken walls and creaky floors anymore, it was becoming something more. She could feel it in the air. The house was transforming piece by piece into something special. With each new layer of paint, every new tile laid, and every beam replaced, Sarah could see her vision coming to life. Despite the growing sense of accomplishment, there were still many challenges ahead. Sarah had already realized that restoring the house was no easy task, and with every day, new problems seemed to arise. The plumbing was a mess, the roof needed to be completely rebuilt, and there were unexpected problems with the foundation. But Sarah was determined to push through. One of the first big issues Sarah had to tackle was the plumbing. The pipes in the house were rusted and brittle, and in some areas they had completely corroded. Water had long since stopped flowing through the system properly, and she knew that the house would be uninhabitable unless she got it fixed. She called in a plumber, who quickly gave her the bad news. The plumbing system was beyond repair and would need to be completely replaced. As Sarah sat in the dimly lit kitchen, thinking about the cost of replacing all the pipes, she felt a wave of doubt wash over her. It was one thing to fix the walls and paint the rooms, but plumbing, that was a huge expense. For a moment, she wondered if she had bitten off more than she could chew. But then she reminded herself why she was doing this in the first place. She had a dream, and she wasn't going to let anything stop her from reaching it. "It's just money," she thought, "and I'll find a way to make it work." So she did what she had always done when faced with a challenge. She found a solution. She took out a loan to cover the cost of the plumbing work, and within a few weeks, the new pipes were installed, running through the house like veins carrying life-giving water. The plumbing was a massive success, and it gave Sarah a renewed sense of confidence. One by one, she was solving the problems that had once seemed insurmountable. With the plumbing now functioning, the next major hurdle was the roof. The roof had been one of the most obvious signs of neglect. Parts of it had collapsed, letting in rainwater and snow. The structure was too weak to hold up much longer, and Sarah knew that if it wasn't fixed soon, the entire house could be at risk of further damage. She spent hours on the phone with contractors, trying to find a team that could fix the roof without breaking her budget. The quotes she received were higher than she had anticipated, and the thought of paying for a new roof on top of everything else was overwhelming. But Sarah refused to let it hold her back. She knew this was a necessary step, and she was willing to do whatever it took to make it happen. Eventually, she found a contractor who was willing to work with her. They replaced the damaged sections of the roof with new materials, reinforcing the structure to make sure it would last for years to come. When the work was finished, Sarah stood outside the house, looking up at the roof, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. It was another milestone, another challenge conquered. But even as Sarah celebrated her successes, she couldn't ignore the strange feeling that seemed to grow inside her with every passing day. The house, though beautiful, felt different. It wasn't just the transformation from an old, decrepit building into a charming home. It was something else. A sense of unease seemed to follow her, especially in the evenings when the house was quiet and the last workers had gone home for the day. At first, Sarah brushed it off as nothing more than her imagination running wild. The house was old, and old houses had creaky floors, strange noises, and drafts. But the more she spent time there, the more she began to notice things that didn't quite make sense. She would hear footsteps behind her, but when she turned around, no one would be there. Sometimes, she would find objects out of place, as though someone had moved them when she wasn't looking. One evening, after a long day of work, Sarah sat on the couch in the living room, enjoying the quiet. It was one of those rare moments when the house felt peaceful, and the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. As she sat there, she noticed something strange out of the corner of her eye, a shadow moving quickly across the wall. She blinked, thinking it was just the dim light playing tricks on her, but the shadow remained, shifting and flickering as though someone was walking just out of sight. Her heart raced, and she quickly stood up, her breath catching in her throat. But when she looked around, the room was empty. There was no one in sight. The shadow had disappeared. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened, but this time it left Sarah feeling more unsettled than before. She had always been practical, a woman of reason, but something about the house made her feel like there was more to it than she understood. Perhaps, she thought, there were things about the house's history that she didn't know yet. Her curiosity got the best of her, and the next day she decided to explore the attic more thoroughly. The attic had always intrigued her. It was dark and cluttered with old boxes and forgotten belongings, and Sarah had yet to go through everything that had been left behind. As she rummaged through the boxes, she found a few more old items, vintage furniture, dusty picture frames, and small trinkets that seemed out of place. But then, near the back of the attic, she found something unexpected, a leather-bound journal. It was old, the pages yellowed with age, but it seemed remarkably well preserved. Sarah gently picked it up and dusted it off, her heart beating faster with excitement. Could this be a journal belonging to one of the house's original owners? She opened it carefully, the spine creaking as the pages turned. The first few entries were dated back to the late 1800s, and they described the lives of the family who had once lived in the house. The journal detailed their daily routines, their joys, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. But as Sarah read on, she began to uncover something more troubling. The entries became darker as the years went by, mentioning mysterious events, strange occurrences, and the family's growing sense of fear. As Sarah read, she could feel the weight of the house's history pressing down on her. The more she learned about the family, the more she began to understand that the house held more than just memories. It held secrets, and those secrets seemed to be waiting for someone to uncover them. The journal mentioned a tragic fire that had ravaged the house many years ago, killing several of the family members. It seemed that the fire had never been fully explained, and some of the surviving family members had moved away, leaving the house abandoned. The entries stopped abruptly, leaving Sarah with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear: there was something about this house that had a history far deeper than she had ever imagined. And as she sat in the attic, the journal in her lap, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the house was trying to tell her something. Weeks passed, and the house began to take shape. What had once been a dark, decaying building was now starting to show signs of life. The rooms were brighter, the floors stronger, and the sense of warmth began to seep into the walls. Sarah was thrilled with the progress she had made, but she knew there was still so much left to do. Every day, she spent long hours working, either with the contractors or by herself, overseeing the changes and making sure everything was moving according to plan. But as the house grew closer to completion, so did the feeling that something was not quite right. Sarah couldn't ignore it anymore. It wasn't just the odd noises she had started to hear in the dead of night, nor was it the shadows she had seen darting across the walls when she was alone. It was something deeper, something she couldn't explain. The house felt different. It felt as though it had a life of its own, as though it was watching her, reacting to her every move. One afternoon, Sarah stood in the grand living room, looking out through the newly installed windows. The light streamed in, casting golden beams across the freshly polished wooden floors. The room was almost unrecognizable from the place she had walked into just a few months ago. It was beautiful, filled with a peaceful energy that she hadn't expected. She smiled to herself, proud of what she had accomplished. But as she stood there, she caught sight of something in the reflection of the glass, a figure standing in the doorway behind her. Her heart skipped a beat and she spun around, but there was no one there. The room was empty. She stood frozen for a moment, trying to shake off the feeling that she was being watched. Perhaps it was just exhaustion, she thought. The long days of work, the stress of making everything perfect had taken their toll, but the feeling wouldn't go away. The next day, Sarah decided to invite a few of her friends and family over to see the progress she had made. It had been months since they had seen the house, and she was eager to show them what she had accomplished. Her cousin Mark and her best friend Emily were the first to arrive. As they stepped into the house, their jaws dropped in amazement. They had expected to see a disaster, but what they found was something entirely different. The house was beautiful, full of life, and in some strange way, warmth. "Sarah, I can't believe it," Emily said, looking around in awe. "This is incredible. It's like a completely different place." Mark, who had always been the most skeptical of Sarah's decision to buy the house, was equally stunned. "I didn't think you could actually pull it off," he admitted, shaking his head. "You've really done it." Sarah beamed with pride, but inside she felt a mix of emotions. The approval of her friends was a relief, but something still gnawed at her. The house had changed, but so had she. Every day, as she worked, she felt more connected to it. It was as though the house and she were becoming one, and the idea that something could be so deeply intertwined with her life, with her soul, was both comforting and unsettling. That evening, after her friends had left, Sarah decided to stay in the house overnight. She had grown used to spending hours there during the day, but she had never stayed after dark. The idea of staying in the house alone at night was something she had been avoiding, but now she felt ready. She wanted to feel the house in its entirety, all of it, both in the quiet of the day and in the stillness of the night. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the house grew dark, Sarah settled in the living room, reading through the journal she had found in the attic. The more she read, the more she learned about the house's tragic history. The journal spoke of the fire, of the family who had once lived there, and of the strange events that seemed to follow them. It seemed that the house had always been a place of mystery, a place where things didn't always make sense. The more Sarah read, the more she felt a connection to the family who had once lived there. Their pain, their joys, and their struggles seemed to echo in her own life. She wondered if perhaps she had been drawn to the house for reasons she couldn't fully understand. Maybe it wasn't just the building that needed fixing. Maybe it was her, too. As she sat there, engrossed in the journal, Sarah heard it again, the sound of footsteps. At first, she thought it was just the house settling, as it often did. But the sound was too distinct, too deliberate. It was as though someone was walking slowly through the hallway outside the room. Her heart began to race, and she stood up, feeling the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She called out, half expecting someone to answer, but there was nothing. The house was silent again. But this time, it wasn't just the usual creaks and groans she had come to expect from an old house. There was something more, something deeper in the air, as though the very walls were breathing. Feeling uneasy, Sarah went to check the hallway. She stepped cautiously, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. As she walked toward the stairs, she caught sight of something in the corner of her eye. A figure. It was faint, almost transparent, standing at the top of the stairs. Sarah froze, her breath caught in her throat. She blinked and the figure disappeared, leaving her standing in the dark, wide-eyed and unsure of what she had just seen. Her heart was pounding in her chest. She turned on the light in the hallway, but there was nothing there. She walked up the stairs, every step feeling heavier than the last. She reached the top and peered down the hallway, expecting to see anything, but the hallway was empty. The house was still. Yet in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. That night, Sarah tried to sleep, but the house felt different. The sounds that had once seemed like nothing more than the natural noises of an old building now felt more purposeful. It was as if the house was alive, watching her, waiting for her to understand something she wasn't yet ready to comprehend. The next day, Sarah decided to dig deeper into the history of the house. She visited the local library and found more records about the family who had lived there. She learned about their wealth, their influence in the town, and their sudden, tragic downfall. But one detail caught her attention, a mention of a long-lost relative, a young girl who had disappeared without a trace. As Sarah read about this mysterious disappearance, a chill ran down her spine. Could this be the key to the strange occurrences she had been experiencing? Was it possible that the house's past was coming back to haunt her? That night, after another long day of work, Sarah stood in the living room, staring at the empty space. The house had changed so much, and yet the mystery of its past still lingered in the air. It was as though the house was waiting for her to uncover the truth, to unlock the secrets that had been buried for so long. As the darkness closed in around her, Sarah knew one thing for certain: she couldn't turn back now. The house had become a part of her, and she would see this journey through to the end, no matter what it took. As Sarah continued to work on the house, her connection to it deepened. Every day, she poured more of herself into the renovation. She had already put so much time and effort into fixing it up, but now she realized that this house was more than just a project. It was a part of her journey. The walls, the floors, and the rooms seemed to speak to her in a way she couldn't explain. She was no longer just restoring a building. She was restoring something much bigger than herself. But as much as Sarah had transformed the house, she couldn't ignore the strange occurrences that seemed to follow her. The shadows that moved on their own, the whispers that she heard late at night, and the feeling that she was being watched, it was becoming harder to dismiss. The more time she spent there, the stronger these sensations became. It wasn't just the house that was changing. She was changing, too. One evening, after spending most of the day working in the attic, Sarah sat in the living room, exhausted but satisfied with her progress. She had just finished restoring an old fireplace that had been covered up for years. The soft crackle of the fire in the hearth was a comfort to her as she relaxed in the cozy warmth of the room. She looked around at the space she had worked so hard to restore, proud of how far it had come. But as she sat there, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house felt different somehow. The air was thick, almost as if it was heavy with emotion, and Sarah could feel it pressing down on her chest. She had become used to the quiet hum of the house, the creaks and groans of an old building settling into place. But tonight, it felt as though the house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Just as she was about to get up and shake off the unease, she heard it again, the faint sound of footsteps echoing in the hallway. But this time, the footsteps didn't stop. They grew louder, closer, as if someone was walking towards her. Her heart raced, and she stood up, her breath catching in her throat. She wasn't sure whether to stay or run, but something inside her told her she had to see what was happening. She stepped cautiously toward the hallway, her footsteps barely making a sound on the wooden floors. As she reached the doorway, she saw it, a figure standing at the end of the hallway just out of reach. The figure was tall, wearing an old-fashioned dress that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It was just standing there, watching her. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she took a step forward, trying to get a better look. But as she did, the figure vanished. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone. The house was silent again. Frozen in place, Sarah's mind raced. Was she imagining things? Could she have just seen a shadow or a trick of the light? But the figure had felt real. She had felt its presence as though it had been waiting for her to notice it. And for the first time since she started working on the house, Sarah felt a sense of dread that she couldn't shake. The next day, she decided to confront her fears. She couldn't keep running from the strange things happening in the house. If she was going to finish this project, she needed to understand what was going on. Sarah returned to the attic where she had found the journal. She needed to find more answers, more details about the family that had lived there, and perhaps the key to the house's mysterious past. She spent hours combing through the old records, the photographs, and the notes that had been left behind. As she sifted through the pages of the journal, she found a passage that sent chills down her spine. It was a letter written by the last remaining member of the family who had once lived in the house. The letter was addressed to a friend, and it described something that had been haunting the family for years. The letter spoke of strange visions, of shadows that moved on their own, of whispers in the night. It described a deep sense of fear that had taken over the house, as though something not human, had been living within its walls. The letter mentioned a tragic event, a fire that had consumed the family, and how the last member had fled the house, leaving everything behind. Sarah felt a chill run through her as she read the letter. It was as though the house itself had been cursed, as though it had been carrying the weight of its tragic past all these years. She couldn't help but wonder, had the spirits of the family never truly left? Had they been waiting for someone like her to restore the house, to bring it back to life? The more she read, the more she realized that this house was not just a building. It was a place filled with memories, with emotions that had never been fully dealt with. The house had been through so much: love, loss, tragedy, and now it seemed to be calling out for closure. And Sarah, for reasons she couldn't fully explain, had become part of that story. That evening, as Sarah sat by the fire in the living room, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was not alone. The air was thick with the sense that something was watching her. She could feel it in the back of her mind, a presence that lingered just beyond her reach. She stood up and walked toward the hallway, determined to face whatever it was that had been haunting her. As she stepped into the hallway, she saw it again, the figure. But this time it was different. It was no longer just standing there. The figure moved toward her slowly, deliberately. Its face was hidden in shadow, but Sarah could feel its eyes on her. The figure reached out its hand, and Sarah felt a wave of cold wash over her. She took a step back, but she couldn't move. The figure was closer now, just a few feet away, and Sarah could hear its soft breath, like a whisper in the dark. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She felt paralyzed, unable to move, unable to escape. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. The house was silent again. For the first time, Sarah understood. The house wasn't just haunted by the spirits of the past. It was calling out to her to finish what had been started, to heal the wounds that had been left behind. She had been drawn to this house for a reason, and now it was clear. The house had been waiting for her all along. As the days went by, Sarah began to feel more at peace with the house. The strange occurrences still happened from time to time, but now, instead of feeling fear, she felt a sense of connection. She no longer saw the house as just a project or a dream. It was a part of her, and she was a part of it. The work on the house continued, and with each passing day it grew more beautiful. The rooms were filled with light, the walls were strong, and the house seemed to breathe with new life. Sarah had restored the house, but in doing so, she had restored herself as well. The house had become a symbol of healing, of growth, and of the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. When the house was finally completed, Sarah stood in the doorway, looking out at the world beyond. The house was no longer a ruin. It was a home, filled with memories and love. And as Sarah stood there, she knew that the house's story wasn't over. It had been given new life, and it was ready for the next chapter. The figure she had seen, the whispers, and the shadows, they were all part of the house's past. But now, Sarah had brought the house into the present, and she was ready to move forward, leaving the past behind. And as she stepped out of the door, she knew that no matter what came next, she would never forget the house, the journey it had taken her on, or the strange, unexplainable things that had made it so much more than just a building.